Welcome to the third episode in a Legendarium series about medieval living. In this installment, A Minstrel Song, we will talk about how the first medieval minstrels came with the Germanic warlords who conquered the Roman Empire. In the halls and forts of these Germanic overlords, the skalds eventually turned into the medieval minstrel who created a new art form called the chansons de geste. However, even the greatest medieval minstrel was no match for the most dangerous enemy of all, changing tastes. The Germanic nations who overran the Roman Empire during the 400s had an oral culture, in which skalds recounted the great deeds of cultural heroes like Beowulf, who destroyed the monster Grendel, and Siegfried, who slew the dragon. The Germanic nations brought this oral culture to Western Europe when they conquered it. During the early Middle Ages, this oral culture thrived in royal halls and forts. The skalds would sing very gory and bloody stories about heroes who were slaughtering men by the hundreds, and they were meant to fortify men for the summer campaigns. After the conversion to Christianity, many of these songs got rewrites. For example, Beowulf may have been half god in the original Germanic version, but in the new Christian version, he simply became a Christian hero who was blessed with preternatural strength. And in time, the skalds would transform themselves into minstrels. Despite the conversion to Christianity, warlords remained warlords. They weren't much interested in the fine arts, but really enjoyed their stories about war, with lots of gory details about skulls being split and limbs being lopped off. One of the most popular songs of 10th and 11th century Europe was the Song of Roland, which told of the heroic death of a Frankish paladin named, appropriately, Roland. In stark contrast to the Arthurian romances of the 12th and 13th centuries, the only reference to love made in the Song of Roland comes when King Charlemagne pledges undying and eternal love and loyalty not to his queen but to his sword. Indeed, swords became especially important in the chansons de geste because they weren't just weapons for the emerging knightly class, they were status symbols. And in the chansons de geste, they were often endowed with magical powers, like Charlemagne's sword Joyeux, which could turn 20 different colors, and Roland's sword, which as he threw into the side of a cliff before he died, became embedded in the stone, and not even the strongest men could pull it out. And then, of course, we've got King Arthur's legendary sword Excalibur. A recurring theme about swords in the chansons de geste is that no one except its rightful owner, the knight, could wield it. And one cannot help but wonder if that's a sign of the jealousy newly made knights felt for their hard-won social status. The minstrels who sang the chansons de geste always wore the flashiest clothing possible, but what they really wanted was the lord's livery, which meant they were the king's man or the duke's man. It gave them regular income, high status, and made it easier to get jobs outside of their regular work entertaining the lord. Some of them could actually become landowners in their own right. A minstrel named Roland le Péteur received 20 acres of land from King Henry II of England for what the monarch considered his masterwork: a leap, a whistle, and a fart. The minstrels performed in the gallery above the feasting hall. The lords preferred this because it kept the classes separated, with the high-born lords eating below and the low-born minstrels performing above. Yet some of those high-born lords forgot that the minstrels could see and hear. Some of the more clever lords began to pay minstrels to spy on their rivals at court. Indeed, some people even began sneaking in spies and thieves disguised as minstrels. Things got so out of hand in some places that courts began to issue official licenses to minstrels so the Lord would know exactly who should be there and who shouldn't. The highest-ranking minstrel was the court musician, who could recite 4,000-line poems like the Trojan War and the Song of Roland, note for note, entirely by heart. The second rank of minstrels was the jongleur, who danced, tumbled, put on puppet shows, and even did acts with bears. One especially bold jongleur covered his head with honey and then enticed a bear to chase him around the hall. I wonder if he survived. The minstrels played many roles in the Lord's Hall besides entertainer, often night watchmen. They would keep an eye out and blow the trumpet in case of a fire or the rival lord trying to make a sneak attack. Minstrels also accompanied the Lord's armies onto battlefields so that they could signal the men with trumpet blasts, or sometimes just give them a hearty tune before charging in. A Norman minstrel named Taillefer accompanied Duke William the Conqueror's army at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. According to one chronicle, the Normans got last-minute jitters, so Taillefer rode up to the English lines, juggling his spear and his lance. The English army enjoyed the show, at least until Taillefer threw his lance into one of the English soldiers, killing him. The Norman knights were then inspired to charge and win the Battle of Hastings. The Norman knights then thanked Taillefer by completely omitting him from the Bayeux Tapestry, and if not for a single surviving chronicle, we would have never known about Taillefer. In a time of limited mobility, minstrels got to do something few others did. They traveled. For example, Beverley's Minster in England became something of a gathering place for minstrels, as the local church used them as performers to greet pilgrims entering the city. But the biggest meeting of all was held in Paris during Lent. During Lenten time, all forms of entertainment were at least officially banned, so minstrels had some downtime where they could travel to Paris and swap stories, learn magic tricks from one another, and teach each other acts so they could keep their lords good and entertained. While the best minstrels could win cushy jobs at a king's court, the others had to worry about old age. And if they were smart, they would marry a well-off tavern keeper or landlord-ess to be provided for in their old age. However, soon the minstrels would face an enemy far more powerful than old age or English huscarls: changing tastes. In the late 1100s, Duke William IX of Aquitaine created a new court filled with singers and musicians, and they created an entirely new art form centered on songs about love and courtly romance, along with tales of high adventure inspired by the Crusades. This new kind of musician was called the troubadour, and soon lords across Europe couldn't get enough of them, and minstrels who couldn't learn the sophisticated and lovelorn music of the troubadour would very likely find themselves out of work. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.